Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Todd Chrisley admits intentionally making staff miserable in prison. Since his presidential pardon and release from prison, Todd and Julie Chrisley have opened up about their time behind bars. Recently, Todd shared a bit of an agenda he had when it came to dealing with the prison staff. This also comes out after Julie talked about an incident in which she got into conflict with a service worker during her time in prison. Todd and Julie Chrisley became known to audiences thanks to their USA Network series, Chrisley Knows Best. In 2022, however, the two were convicted to a combined 15 years in prison thanks to charges, including bank fraud and tax evasion. Julie was sentenced to 7 years at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, while Todd was set to spend a 12-year sentence at the federal prison camp in Pensacola. Around 2 years into their sentence, however, the two received an early release thanks to a presidential pardon from President Donald Trump. With their release, Todd and Julie have been sharing their story with fans through various outlets. The two recently made an appearance on their daughter Savannah's Unlocked podcast. Opening up, Todd claimed that he rarely got into conflict with the other inmates. However, there was another group that he shared he didn't get along with. According to Todd, he made his presence known to the prison staff. The Chrisley Knows Best star shared, "I told staff off. I told CEOs, correctional officers, and staff off." For her part, Julie felt that she didn't have as many issues with staff. Todd attributed this to her up there being Miss Pollyanna while in Lexington. However, Julie did have some issues in prison, previously recounting an incident where she was locked in a cafeteria by a food service worker and correctional officer. Julie shared, "He was just a miserable human being. He really was," with Todd adding, "They all are." She also confirmed that the officer has since retired. Todd continued to share his dislike for the staff. Concerning the service worker in Julie's story, he shared, "I would have put a BP-8 on his referring to an administrative complaint. He continued, "I was surrounded by miserable human beings. And every day I got up and it was my sole intent to make their life even more miserable because they were there to make our lives miserable." Have you been following this story? Did you watch Todd and Julie on Savannah's Unlocked podcast? Make sure you come back to for all the latest reality TV and celebrity news. Todd Chrisley stood beneath the soft studio lights, his usual polished bravado dimmed by something heavier. Something that felt almost like truth. "I need to say something I never thought I would," he began, voice steady but softer than his southern charm usually allowed. "And I don't say it for headlines or sympathy. I say it because it's time." Cameras rolled. The room was still. I did it intentionally. The silence that followed stretched out like the Tennessee plains he once called home. No one interrupted, not the producers. Not Julie, who sat just off stage. Not even Savannah, whose wide eyes shimmered with the sort of disbelief that can only come from watching a parent fall from grace in slow motion. But what exactly had he done? It wasn't just the tax evasion headlines or the bankruptcy filings that lingered in the tabloids like cigarette smoke. This wasn't a confession about wire fraud or falsified bank documents, at least, not only that. This was something deeper, more personal. "I knew exactly what I was doing," he continued, placing both palms on the table as if anchoring himself in honesty. "It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't ignorance. I made a decision years ago to live a life that looked perfect. And in doing so, I chose illusion over integrity. I built an empire out of appearances. And I knew what I was risking." It was the kind of admission no one expected. For years, Chrisley Knows Best painted a picture of pristine Southern family values. Opulence wrapped in tradition, Wit layered with warmth. A family that argued, yes, but loved harder. But behind the gates and gilded edges, there was something else, something calculated. It started small, Todd said, as though unraveling a memory he'd tucked away behind tailored suits and scripted sass. Little things. Buying things I couldn't quite afford because they looked good on TV. Making business decisions that weren't really about business, but about image. Taking shortcuts. Cutting corners. Not just with money, with people. With my kids. With myself. He took a breath. I intentionally built a brand on being bulletproof. A man who always had the answer. But in doing so, I forgot how to be human. There was a shift in the room then. A soft murmur from the crew. A cough. A tear. I wasn't addicted to money, he clarified. I was addicted to control. To making sure no one could see me sweat. And when things started to unravel, instead of facing the truth, I doubled down. I created new lies to cover old ones. Told myself, this is just temporary. You're doing it for the family. You're doing it for the brand. But the truth, I was doing it for me. This wasn't the first time a celebrity admitted fault. But it was the way Todd spoke, less like a man confessing to a crime, more like a man unburdening his soul, that made it land with a different weight. I watched myself become a stranger, he said. Watched my kids mimic my worst behaviors, thinking they were strengths. Watched my wife carry burdens she never asked for. And still, I kept going. Because admitting I was wrong felt worse than being wrong. He turned slightly, addressing the camera directly now. To every fan who looked up to us, I'm sorry. Not just for the mistakes, but for presenting something fake and calling it real. For teaching you that success looks like perfection instead of peace. Julie finally stepped forward then. Her hand found his shoulder. The quiet support of a woman who'd seen everything but waited for him to say it himself. I don't know what happens next, Todd said. I can't undo what I've done, but I can stop pretending. I can stop performing. And perhaps that was the most intentional act of all. Behind closed doors, the family wrestled with the fallout. This wasn't just about lawsuits or jail time. It was about trust, about identity. Savannah, who had built her own platform of independence, found herself rethinking every life lesson she'd internalized. Dad always said we should be the best, she whispered once to a friend, but maybe he just didn't know how to be enough. Grayson, still too young to understand it all, clung to the hope that truth would be a better role model than success. And Todd. He began a process most never start, learning how to live without the applause. He stepped away from the cameras, began weekly meetings with a therapist not for optics, but for the real work of facing his flaws. He wrote letters, not emails, not tweets, to those he'd wronged. Former employees, old friends, his father. The letters never begged for forgiveness. They simply named the wrongs. I lied to you. I manipulated your trust. I pretended I had it all together when I didn't. The act of honesty became his quiet revolution, and it was hard. There were days he regretted saying anything publicly. Days when the media spun his confession into content. Headlines like Todd Chrisley, From Fame to Shame, followed him.